Blair Bobier is an attorney, activist, and author. As a former public defender, he is drawn to Daya Foundation's efforts to bring yoga to jails and prisons. His criminal law practice emphasizes the importance of upholding everyone's civil and constitutional rights. Mr. Bobier serves on the Benton County Planning Commission and is nationally recognized for his pioneering work in election reform and political campaigns. He works as a campaign consultant and public interest lobbyist and has participated in landmark legal cases affecting the election process. His writing has appeared in newspapers across the country, including The Oregonian, The Los Angeles Times, USA Today, and the San Jose Mercury News. He lives with his family in the foothills of the Coast Range, where he plants trees and tends several gardens. You can learn more about him at blairbobier.com. Okay, well, it's really great to see you again, Blair. Thank you for joining me.
And you as well. It's a pleasure.
Well, I will say it's been a long time since I've seen you in person, but we did share a time together living in community at Brighton Bush Hot Springs, and I don't think either one of us has aged a bit.
I would agree with that completely.
Yeah, it's really amazing to live off the grid in community with people who resonate with a vision and a mission, and to have that kind of vitalize your life. It was also there that I decided I had to leave that paradise to go teach yoga in prison. And I know I consulted with a lot of people about that, and they said, "You're leaving paradise to go to prison? Why would you do such a thing?" But I was really kind of compelled to go teach where yoga wouldn't be accessible. And now I look back on that and I say I was kind of compelled to go into the shadows where yoga and other people's wisdom could like intermingle, and I might learn something from the shadows that I otherwise wouldn't get to learn about if I stayed at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. I wonder if you could talk about your own journey from Brighton Bush back into criminal defense work and the experience you have with shadow stuff as well.
Sure, because my time at Brighton Bush was kind of a bit of sort of the meat or the tofu in a shadow sandwich, because I came from the shadows and then went back to the shadows. So I started working in criminal defense during law school. I started being a law clerk at the public defender in Portland, Oregon, and then after school I went and worked as a lawyer as a public defender. Went to Brighton Bush, did a number of other things, and then a handful of years ago went back to working indigent criminal defense as a public defender, and now I also work as a legal aid attorney. So I've spent a lot of time working in the shadows or with people who are in the shadows, and it's a part of our world that very few people get to see. And it's different. It's populated by, I don't want to say different people, but people that other folks don't necessarily run into or don't get to learn their stories. And so I've worked with a whole spectrum of people who have not been as fortunate as we have been in our lives to have the kind of backgrounds or relative affluence that we come from, to have the education that we have. And there's a lot of people who are struggling and suffering. I find that in doing my work in criminal defense that there's a lot of addiction, there's a lot of health problems, and those are all the kinds of things that are really underfunded or swept under the rug or unaddressed in our society. And I think even people from the other end of the political spectrum realize that it would make more sense to address those issues up front than have to deal with them later. And I find that a lot of life in the shadows perpetuates itself, so that once someone gets into what they would call the system, they get snared in the system, snared, I should say, and it's hard or maybe impossible for some to get out. And what I mean by that is once someone gets a certain type of felony conviction, it's harder to get into housing, it's harder to get loans, it's harder to get jobs. And so the very people who really need those types of entry into society are denied the very entry that they need in order to become productive members. And then once they're in the system, they also have different obligations they have to meet if they're put on probation, for example. And being on probation requires that someone have some amount of organizational skills, that they
Mm-hmm.
have transportation, that they're able to make phone calls. And a lot of my clients didn't have cars or had to depend on other people for rides, and their cars would break down on the way to court, or they'd have to take buses. They often didn't have cell phones, or their minutes would run out, and they didn't have organizational skills that
Mm-hmm.
would help them organize transportation to get to court
Mm-hmm.
or to get to their probation assignments. And then what happens is when they wind up kind of violating the terms of their probation, they wind up in the same situation all over again, but deeper in debt because now they owe more fines and
Mm-hmm.
fees and things like that. So maybe kind of a long answer, but that's just scratching the surface of what I've seen in my time in what we're calling the shadows.
Yeah, yeah. Well, something you said at the very first part of that response leads me to ask, what do you think people who have not been exposed to or gone into the shadows, what are they missing out on? What is the loss for them in not understanding those other humans?
Well, a number of things. And I just saw something recently, and I don't remember who it was that the quote comes from, but you can take a measure of a society by walking into their prisons.
Mm.
And if you walk in our prisons, it's not or jails, it's not a particularly pretty place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question, what are the folks missing who don't
Yeah,
see that or don't know that?
what is the loss for them in not diving in, not understanding, not connecting with those shadow dwellers, as I might sometimes call them?
Well, I'm sure there's some type of a personal loss for them in not expanding their horizons or getting to know more about their fellow human beings. But I think it's just a lack of understanding because so many people, in particular, view the criminal justice system as a place where there's bad people. And I don't think there's bad people in the criminal justice system so much as people who are in bad circumstances or who maybe
Mm-hmm.
have made some bad decisions or have done some stupid stuff. I mean, President Obama had admitted to using cocaine in the past, for example, and he's very lucky that as an African American in this country that he was not incarcerated for using cocaine, as so many people are.
Mm-hmm.
There's a disproportionate number of African Americans and Latinos in prisons and jails. So people who don't see that, I think, get a very skewed perspective of what goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes, I agree with you. One of the reasons that I organized this telesummit and I put this theme together from the Bhagavad Gita, one reason I did it this way is that in the story of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna, who's the main character, he and his brothers come back from this period of exile in the forest where they were deepening their study because they had lost their kingdom in a gambling match. That story is for another time between you and I. But they come back and they are caused to encounter the 100 cousins who are across this battlefield. And those cousins represent the other, the shadow, the ways in which the human mind goes out of balance and causes itself kind of its own trouble on the inside, and then perpetuates interpersonal trouble. So these guys went off to study. They come back to the kingdom hoping to regain their homeland, and they're kind of affronted with and shocked by the shadow that they have to encounter in the other. And I think we actually have very few skills for doing that as a culture. And in this case, Arjuna has to get his teacher on board and ask some questions and find his way. But I wonder how did you do it as a young, enthusiastic lawyer to walk in and and see the otherness in the other as something of your own that needed care?
It's a really good question, and I think going into that at first, there's a real sort of mixture of excitement and fear and awe, and to some extent, sort of thinking like, "Ooh, that's not me." There is some otherness, and then the flip side of that is there, but for the grace of
Mm-hmm.
God, go I. Like President Obama, I did an awful lot of stupid stuff in my youth, and even stuff that wasn't necessarily stupid, but was probably illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And living in the pale skin that I have afforded me perhaps the opportunity to escape circumstances that other people may not have. So uh, I think there's just in myself a certain amount of recognition of how fortunate I am, and also just empathy. I mean, I don't see a whole lot of difference between other people and myself, as I say, really just circumstances. And
Mm-hmm.
again, and I keep going back to these maybe religious or biblical expressions that I'm not a necessarily religious or biblical person, but they tend to explain things pretty well. And part of it is the golden rule. I just would do to others as I would want them to do to me. And as a lawyer, I had skills and language that they needed. The court system and the justice system is so foreign that I see my role often as being an ambassador or an interpreter, just trying to explain to people in the most direct, simple possible terms as to how these proceedings are going to affect them in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So I went into it and didn't know what to expect, and I have a lot of respect for people who do that on a really long-term basis. As I think I've told you, it's something that I've kind of gone in and out of. And when I was at Brighton Bush, there was a period when I was out of it and kind of recuperating from it, and I needed the recuperation in order to go back into it later. So I've spent a number of years doing it, but my hat really gets tipped to those people who do it on a long-term basis.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as does mine. It's rigorous work, and can be tiresome. People can feel very alone, as it were, if their vision is one similar to yours, where there's empathy on board, not just like get through the system, get the job done, but that real human connection and empathy. That that makes your heart more porous to the experience other people are having.
It does, and it can really be incredibly draining emotionally and spiritually and in oh so many ways because it's really difficult and people go through a lot and there's a lot of injustice. And
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that fascinates me is when I go to different courthouses around the state that you see that it's a certain segment of society that's there, and those are the people, as I say, who are snared in the
Mm-hmm.
process. And you look around and you think, boy, this is just such a fraction of quote unquote crime that's going on, but you don't see any bankers in there. You don't see the
Mm-hmm.
people who wreck the economy through the mortgage crisis. You don't see people who are doing insurance fraud
Mm-hmm.
by and large. And so it's not white collar crime that's showing up so much in the courthouse. It's really sort of petty stuff and things that are um, perhaps used by other elements of society to kind of suppress other elements of society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're really kind of looking at a battle going on in there. This group of society members, this group of society members, a conflict between values, would you say?
Well, it's unfortunate, but the criminal justice has really been used in a lot of different ways. And going back, and I'm sure it's gone back further than this, but for example, Richard Nixon started the war on drugs in part because he wanted to get at protesters.
Mm-hmm.
He knew that a lot of the protesters used cannabis, and the war on drugs was one way to go after that. I think Ronald Reagan had gone after free speech, protesters
Mm-hmm.
that way, and we see different things now where protesting, different legislatures have looked at making types of protests illegal or making protesters pay for the costs of their protests. So different things, environmental activism has come under attack in different
Mm-hmm.
legislatures. So yes, it's very definitely used as a tool by those in power against those who are out of power or who want
Mm-hmm.
to um, uh, those who want to dissent, among
Yeah.
other things.
Mm-hmm. So what would you?
Change agents.
Yeah, yeah, that's where I seem to have been led in my life to be a part of the process of change, and I don't think I had any cognition about it. It wasn't actually cognition that drove me to do what I'm doing. It was some other haunt, as I like to say. I had this urge to teach yoga in prison. I couldn't explain it intellectually or cognitively. I couldn't even really explain it spiritually at the time, but I was haunted to do it. And so I sometimes think of myself as a change agent, but like an agent in a chemical process, I need other agents to be in there, other processes
Mm-hmm.
to make it happen. So, what would you say to someone who's enthusiastic, passionate, maybe a little bit educated, but not deeply educated yet? Where do they start this conversation?
I guess with themselves, for starters. I think that's just something that people maybe have that awakening or that bit of idea, initiative, and then taking it somewhere else. I've done a lot of different things where I've been really fortunate to have found that other right partner or person that I go to and say, gee, I've got this crazy idea. And then the other person says, I kind of like that crazy idea. And then you're off and running.
Mhm.
So I've found that it really doesn't take much to get things going. And in fact, one person can do a phenomenal amount, as you yourself have shown. I mean, you took the initiative to do this and started a whole thing, which is fantastic. And I've seen that time and time again in other places. So having seen it myself, having worked as an activist, and immodestly knowing what I can accomplish just as one person, and again, someone who's been fortunate to have skills and education and training, people can do a lot. And there's a lot of things that I've done as an activist that I didn't get trained to do, that I didn't
Mhm.
necessarily have a background in, and I just kind of had to figure it out myself. So I really think that the proverbial sky's the limit, and people, if they have any inkling of doing something, they should just start and put one foot in front of the other and just go for it, because that's how all things start.
Mhm. And a lot of times in the yoga and social justice community, we're having a conversation about kind of like unpacking our own baggage, understanding our own shadow, looking at our impulse to do good, and checking to see if it's laced with things like power or prejudice. How important has that been in your community, and what do you make of those questions?
In my community,
Well, the community of other like legislators or lawyers or advocates that you know.
I don't know. I do know that I remember hearing some green activists say a while back that I'm not afraid of the P word, of power,
Mm-hmm.
and that those people wanted power for their ideas. They didn't necessarily want power for themselves, but understanding
Mm-hmm.
what power is and how to use it, and how to use it as a force for change and for good. And maybe there's people, certainly from the activist side and anywhere else, who have their ego on the line. I think really what we see more of is systems that perpetuate themselves. I mean, once someone gets elected to office, their number one job seems to be staying in office and
Mm-hmm.
getting reelected. And they don't necessarily serve their constituencies.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm drifting away from the
Drifting is
question.
fine by me. I'm following you. Mm-hmm.
So I think everybody's got their own shadow or ego or um, maybe motivation for doing things, but I don't know in terms of being an activist that I necessarily sort that out so much myself, or that I see others sorting it out. I think that people just realize that we have work to do,
Mm-hmm.
and these are the times that we're in, and the work needs to be done, and you just kind of roll up your sleeves and do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I really resonate with what you're saying about the P word and the power in ideas or the power of like basic goodness getting acted on. Because I never had any sense of my own, at all, any sense of my own aggrandizement for the work that I've
Mm-hmm.
been doing. And I don't know how to use social media really or market or like shout from rooftops that I'm doing this thing. And I actually haven't had the time to shout from rooftops because I'm going into the prison. As you know,
Right.
there's no communication from the inside out when you're in there. And so I haven't spent time announcing it because my personal resources are about actually doing it, as well as
Mm-hmm.
building communities that can help sustain the work that we've been doing in Oregon. So I love what you said there about P as power, that isn't about the person trying to make something more of themselves per se. And in fact, it's one of the values in the Bhagavad Gita that Arjuna, his teacher, keeps telling him: act selflessly without attachment to the outcomes of your actions, but do good actions. Like put skill into action and see where that goes. Mm-hmm.
And you don't know where it goes. It just can keep resonating. It's like throwing a pebble into the middle of a pond and watching the ripples go outward, because you put something in motion and you don't know where it's going to turn
Mm-hmm.
up. I mean, I think that so many of the big changes that we've seen in culture and society, that people just started doing their little their little piece of the puzzle, and you don't know who else is working on what other puzzle piece somewhere
Mm-hmm.
else. And before you know it, if people keep putting together all those different pieces, then you've got a complete picture.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been there if you hadn't done your piece.
Hmm. Yeah. And to do it selflessly for me has also meant enabling others to get involved and collaborate on that. So one little piece of a puzzle connects to another piece of a puzzle, and the puzzle has gotten bigger and more cohesive, which is I hadn't expected. I didn't have a future vision when I walked in the first time. I just knew I had to do it.
Hmm.
A bit
Yeah.
ago you said when you first were doing this work, sometimes there was fear, excitement, awe, trepidation. There's actually a part of Arjuna's experience when he's talking with his teacher where he experiences this. He's been sort of pleading with his teacher to show his vision, to show himself. And when Arjuna sees Krishna in his full self, at first he's like awe-stricken, amazed, like taken aback in the luminosity that his teacher is. And then his teacher shows him also everything of human nature, including death and destruction. And Arjuna gets very anxious and he says, "That's enough. Pack it up. I don't want to see it anymore." How do you recommend to people that they keep their eyes and hearts open? When overwhelm comes, what do they do with it?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's kind of maybe like being a dream catcher or something. You just have to let an awful lot go through you, and
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing I think about because we do this work day in and day out, and by and large, we're well fed and we're living in a pretty relatively calm, relatively affluent society on the grander scale of things,
Mm-hmm.
and simultaneously, while we're doing it, there's strife and war in so many different places, and poverty,
Mm-hmm.
and to not get overwhelmed or sidetracked by that, it's just to keep going. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you just can't take that on because then I mean, I think that'll destroy someone. And if anyone's going to work in these type of fields, you just have to learn to let a certain amount of that pass through and maybe just keep enough in you or within you to keep yourself
Mm-hmm.
aware and motivated and to keep moving forward. But you certainly can't take it all on. And there is just a certain amount of detachment and positive detachment, I think.
Mm-hmm. That's a yoga word too. I don't know if you're aware of that, but we talk about attachment and non-attachment in yoga. Non-attachment, skillful non-attachment is like being that dream catcher where some things land, some things have to pass through you, and
Hmm.
the the openness, the porousness of your own heart, body, and psyche is kind of a requirement if we're going to keep going. As at least
Yes.
in my experience, it is. I had a kind of weird question arise, and it came back a moment ago, so I'll put it on the table. I'm thinking about the possibility of people hitting their frustration points in these settings, like your clients,
Hmm.
the what do you call the other side? Not the defendant, but the other
The
lawyer,
prosecutor. The
prosecutor. Thank you.
prosecutor.
Okay,
Hmm.
so your client, the prosecutor, the courthouse, you hitting a frustration point. What do we? What is that about when they're like a quagmire and everyone's potential anger, frustration, and misperceiving of the others? Like, what about that? Am I misperceiving? Does that happen? Is this just in the movies that I've chosen to watch?
No, it happens. It can be pretty complicated. Um, I think part of it is that everybody has a role to play, and so whatever you do outside of the courtroom, when you step in the courtroom, it's a little bit like stepping onto a stage, and there's scripts to be followed and the like, and I think that people are somewhat accustomed to dealing with the other people in their roles,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's probably most unfair and most unfortunate for my clients, the defendants in these actions, because they're the ones who have obviously everything on the line,
Yeah.
or certainly more on the line than anyone else in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
And yet everyone else kind of sticks to their script.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm there, yes, Your Honor, no, Your Honor, oh, Your Honor, I object, instead of saying this is complete and utter bullshit. Um, and the judge, thank you, objection overruled or whatever, and the prosecutor has her say. So it's people playing roles, and I think that there's the opportunity to do things perhaps out of the courtroom to make those more humane. So, for example, once, and I don't know if this was inappropriate or not, but I stopped one judge and I just had to say, I want to thank you because I like the way you relate to my clients as humans.
Mm-hmm.
And I just had to let this judge know that, because some judges would not go that far or go that deep in really trying to figure out what's going
Mm-hmm.
on with clients, or just addressing them as a mother or a daughter or
Mm-hmm.
some kid who's struggling to get through school or work. So recognizing everyone's humanity is really helpful.
Yeah, yes. That's one of my core values. What do you make of today's divisiveness based on the election and your experience in this?
um, well, I think it has probably just exposed that which has always been there. um, there's racism, there's divisiveness, there's haves and have-nots, and there's people who are angry about other people, and there are bigots, and it's probably a good thing that it's out in the light. What's not such a good thing is that people in positions of power, by either supporting or not demonstrably opposing racism, bigotry, are empowering others to act in those ways. So that's really unsettling.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think it comes down to recognizing people's humanity. And as we talked about the other day, I think there's a lot more commonality with people than there are divisions. And I live out in the country. I live in a pretty rural spot that's kind of conservative and kind of Republican. And I know many of my neighbors are, and people that are at my kids' school, people that I carpool with, but
Mm-hmm.
we all have the same things that we want. We want our kids to be happy and safe and get a good education, and I think we all want to have clean drinking water, and we
Mm-hmm.
want the roads to work so we can get back and forth to places. So I think that the divisiveness in part exists, but I think there are also other forces that play up the divisiveness for their own gain.
Mm-hmm.
And it certainly behooves certain types of politicians to accentuate the divisiveness or prey on it. Certainly the media does,
Mm-hmm.
because the more clicks they get by making things more divisive and more exciting, the more um, revenue they generate.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in some ways that's a particularly dangerous trend.
Mm-hmm.
And we, as just humans and citizens, need to figure out how to skillfully circumvent that, to create our own communication circles
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that we stay respectful. And I think that is one good thing about the courtroom and certain political processes, is
Mm-hmm.
where you can say things like, Your Honor, prosecutor has said such and such. However, the law shows such and such, and you can say that without saying, that person's a jerk, or that
Mm-hmm.
person didn't do their homework, or has no idea what they're talking about. You just focus on the issues, and I think that's kind of keeping your eye on the prize kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something, not to take political sides, and I will say I didn't vote for Barack Obama, but I think he has been very skillful and diplomatic, and particularly in the last part of his presidency, where he was really having to straddle some fine lines in terms of this incoming administration. And I
Mm-hmm.
think he's done a really good job of addressing issues without inflaming them. And I think that's a good model to follow.
Mm-hmm. So, how would like average citizens who don't have his elegance or yours with language, how would they start conversations if they perceive there's this big discord? How do they start the conversation, what I might call like a social justice conversation that still has heart and it has purpose, not just the louder you can yell, you're the winner. How do they get
So
started?
I think the most important thing is to listen. So if I was talking to someone, I'd ask a question and then I'd
Mm-hmm.
shut my mouth and listen for a while, because that's the best way. You don't know where that other person is coming from. You don't know why they have the positions that they do, and you shouldn't make those kind of presumptions and then start building presumptions on top of presumptions. So maybe just ask that person that you work with or that neighbor, hey, why do you support this? What do
Mm-hmm.
you think about this?
Mm-hmm.
And then take it from there.
Mm-hmm. And when somebody starts to get heated, what happens, by the way, to Arjuna is in the beginning of his experience, he has a dry mouth, his heart is palpitating, and his hair is standing on end. So he's, of course, having like a panic attack. He's very anxious. What about they're in it, they're having the conversation, and they get activated?
Uh, you know, um, that happens to all of us. And I think we've probably all seen what happens when you either allow yourself to escalate, as
Mm-hmm.
I've done more often than I'd care to admit, or when you have to realize that the more excited that someone else gets is the time for you to get more and more calm and more grounded.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the best thing you can do is just say, I think we need to continue this conversation another time.
Mm-hmm.
It's always okay to kind of de-escalate, walk away, put something on ice.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one thing a lot of us forget is we don't always have to do something just because we started.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asks you a question or someone wants to put you on the spot. Doesn't mean you have to stay there. It's like, thank you for your question. I'd like to think about this and get back to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the issues apparently aren't going away because human nature's been doing this particular kind of dance with different narratives and different dates and names for a long time. So the issue and the opportunity isn't actually going away. It just seems very fired up right now, given the circumstances in our country. And that divisiveness doesn't seem to put people in their most clear self for having the conversations. Like they're geared up to be on their side, and the other person is on the opposite side.
It's true. It's true. And that's kind of the $64,000 question. It's a good one. And I look back to historically the civil rights movement. And I loved how when people did those protests, how dignified they were,
Yeah.
and they wore suits and dresses, and really, just by their manner, put things on a whole different level of discourse. So
Yeah.
I think there's some lessons to be learned there. There was a recent sit-in that the NAACP did down. I believe it was in I think it was at Senator Sessions' office, in his hometown, and local leaders of the NAACP, along with the national president, I believe, of the NAACP, did a sit-in.
Mm-hmm.
And they tweeted a picture, and it was great just to see a handful of people, well dressed, very calmly, occupying someone's office.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more we can do things like that, I think the better off we'll all be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a teaching in yoga. It's based on what's called the gunas, spelled Gunas. There are three gunas: tamas, rajas, and sattva. So sattva is that guna that's the most elegant, the most lucid, the most like translucent. It's the most porous, the least likely to get agitated. Rajas is the guna that is easily agitated. It can be when it's horizontal, it's like going out in greed and delusion. And tamas is the element that's the most inert or kind of pulled downward. So people isolating or withdrawing or collapsing and saying, like, I'm moving to Canada. People like retreating, that would be tamas. People arguing and fighting out against, that would be rajas. And sitting in the elegant possibility of like clear, lucid, open conversations that are honest and courageous, that would be up in the sattvic realm up here. And this is discussed in the Bhagavad Gita as what's recommended is the sattvic approach, not the rajasic or the tamasic approach.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of that?
That's exactly what I was saying.
Ancient yoga wisdom.
Yes.
Hmm.
Well, it does seem to mirror or resonate.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I really do think that that's perhaps more of an ancient lesson of that could be applied and in the ways that I was describing.
Hmm.
I think we're just better off when we do that.
Yeah, I'm always impressed when, like, I'm studying yoga today. It's the year 2017. I've been studying yoga for 25 years, maybe more. I lose track of my age. And it's still relevant. What was taught thousands of years ago, based on human nature then, is still relevant to me and to us today. Like, the gunas still make sense, right here and now. I was just walking from my little room here at Kripalu Yoga Center to go to the dining room for a cup of tea and then come back and meet up with you. And I found myself wanting to rush. There's no need to rush here at all. So I just slowed down my footsteps and I was like, oh, that's the sattvic approach. I'm just gonna walk like a casual human being going for a cup of tea. I'm not in any hurry. The tea's gonna be there. But that habit to be rajasic, to be active, to feel
Hmm.
urgent, to get stuff done, that habit that habit begets that habit to keep doing itself. As does the
I,
habit of hiding. It begets the habit of more hiding.
I could use some more yoga lessons, I think, because that
Oh.
would be really helpful. Well, I did something similar. I was walking outside. I live in the country, and I was rushing back inside, and I had to stop myself and stop and listen. And there's two creeks out here,
Hmm.
and I just got to stop and listen to them both. And it took a took a minute. I mean, it took a minute to get myself to do that, and then it took a minute, fortunately, to slow down and do that. But
Hmm.
I don't do that often enough.
Yeah. I like to say it takes a minute, but it gives you back hours and years to your life. Because
It's true.
to rest in the feeling of timelessness and that bigger presence that's helping us to do our work, for me, that's far less draining than to feel like I have to get it done. That somehow I uniquely am positioned in this little firestorm that I have to get something done. That's when I get tired. I start believing that, I get more deflated. And I have to go back to my yoga mat. I'm really on my yoga mat on a daily basis, but I'm often again in my yoga practice, in a yoga pose, in a breathing practice, in a mindfulness moment, repeatedly, sometimes discreetly,
Mhm.
standing in the lobby, what I call the lobby at the prison, waiting for security clearance, just appearing to stand there while practicing internal yoga. you know, it's really something.
Yeah, it's a good time to get yourself breathing and
Mm-hmm.
centered and grounded.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to know a little bit about the work that you're doing now because we've talked about it, and I'd like our listeners to understand the work you're doing in fair housing because I think
Mhm.
it's a big issue in Oregon, and many people outside of Oregon might look to Oregon and think, well, it's tremendous. They have low rates of recidivism. They have these great programs, and it can look a little bit paradisical, but we do have challenges. What are you working on right now?
So right now I'm working on a grant to basically enforce the Federal Fair Housing Act.
Mm-hmm.
And the Fair Housing Act was part of the great civil rights acts of the mid 60s. There was the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and the last piece was the Fair Housing Act.
Mm-hmm.
And it's intended so that there's no discrimination in housing against people on the basis of race, color, nationality, um, language, family status, gender,
Mm-hmm.
or disability. And some of those have been added over the years. They weren't in the original Fair Housing Act. And so the way it manifests is I see a lot of people who are disabled and maybe they're getting evicted
Mm-hmm.
and they need either to not be evicted or they need more time in order to find a new place to live that will accommodate their disability. Sometimes I see places that appear to be discriminating on the basis of the language that the people speak or the country that they're from. And I think the biggest thing, and it's a broader justice issue, is that when people in Oregon are getting evicted, which very often they are because there's so many people moving here, and if
Mm-hmm.
anyone sees this and thinks of moving here, it rains all the time. Don't. Um, Housing costs are going through the roof, and there's very little affordable housing. So when people at the lower end of the economic spectrum get kicked out of their houses, of their homes, their apartments, they really have almost nowhere to go
Right.
because the market's so tight and what's there isn't affordable.
Mm-hmm.
So while I do see a certain element of discrimination around the edges, and that's unfortunate, and hopefully we're helping to educate landlords about the practices. Um, the bigger problem I see is really a lack of affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
There's an awful lot of people living in substandard conditions that if they had a better place to go, they would, or if they had any leverage with their landlord, that
Mm-hmm.
the places would be improved. But just a lot of people who are on the edge and don't have anywhere to go, there's no safety net.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm just curious. This came to mind a couple times during our talk also, and it just came back. Frequently in the work that I do when I'm meeting students, you might call them clients, they're my students. Something about one of them or another of them at any one time inspires a sense of like courage and humility for me. And it's often a very surprising interaction. I I'm taken by surprise. It's not that I'm not available to that courage and humility. I'm surprised by when it emerges because it seems like a moment where it wouldn't be expected. And I wonder if you have a recent experience with a client where their humanity or humility or courage kind of was a benefit to you, something that you learned from or were touched by.
I'm not sure that I could think of any one in particular. We did participate, we being legal aid, in a an event in Newport last week, and it was called Project Homeless Connect.
Mm.
And so it was a whole bunch of social service providers looking to provide services or help or assistance or advice to people who are homeless. And just about everybody there that came through, I was
Mm-hmm.
touched by just their ability to keep it together, to um, for lack of a better term, soldier on,
Mm-hmm.
and just live with dignity in circumstances that I think a lot of people would consider to be challenging or less than dignified. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I have opportunity to learn humility and courage on a regular basis. Whether or not I actually learn it, I certainly have the opportunity.
Yes, yeah. One of the programs we have at my yoga studio is for adaptive yoga, so people can come who have disabilities of some kind or who are living on disability because the condition they have now prohibits them from working, something like scleroderma or later stages of multiple sclerosis and so on. And the prison work that I've been doing, we're doing a teacher training inside the prison to help adults in custody become yoga teachers for adults in custody who have neurological conditions, developmental delays, traumatic brain injuries, the sorts of adults in custody who aren't likely to get job positions that were they to leave. They don't have when they leave the prison. They don't have the confidence, the skills, the education to get a job out there. So we're trying to help that particular unfortunate cycle. So I was watching our adults in custody who were now yoga teachers teach their class to the adults in custody who are their students who have these DDs and TBIs and neurological diversities. And I was so impressed by the quality of heart that our guys, I call them our guys, our regular adults in custody without traumatic brain injuries, how they held the space for and opened themselves to the more vulnerable students in the prison. And it's been a tremendous heart opening experience for me to watch that. And I expected that they would be transformed by taking a yoga teacher training. And I expected that being with this other population would also transform them. But I underestimated the amount of kindness that was going to come through these guys. And that tells you that it's exponential because I have pretty high standards for human nature. I'm thinking big here that it's possible. So I was, I was just, sometimes I just bask in the back of the classroom watching them teach and I think, whoa, this is so remarkable. I wish citizens on the outside could see it. They could see this person who's in here for life, which means a
Mm-hmm.
significant crime committed as an adolescent. He's in here for life doing this. and meaning every word of what he says to his students
Right.
and so on. So, yeah, it's big.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and maybe there's if there's a way to share that or communicate that, maybe there's something to be said for that, to let others kind of see what you got to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, we have to find our ways to do it because there are regulations upon regulations about what can be shared outside of.
Yes, yes, there
There's
are.
requirements and security processes and such. So I get to share the glow that comes to me through it, and hopefully
Yeah.
that's also a catalyst for people. Well, in the time that we have left, just a couple minutes remaining, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to let our listeners know about, or a perspective that I didn't touch on that you'd like to add?
I can't think of anything offhand. We've had a pretty far-ranging discussion, which has been wonderful, and I hope that others find it as useful and inspiring as I have.
Hmm. Thank you. Thank you. It's really fun to see you again in this context
You
uh,
too?
and to resonate like this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's being former community members. It's kind of like seeing a long lost sister or something because we
Hmm.
haven't been in physical proximity for a while. We've talked on the phone, but we haven't even done this little electronic gathering.
Yeah.
So thank you for all the work you're doing, and I certainly hope to see you up at Brighton Bush in a couple of months.
Yes, wonderful. And also, thank you for your advocacy in Oregon and the legislation you just got passed about voting, the process for
Thank you.
voting. It's really tremendous.
Appreciate that.
I'm
Thank you.
honored to know you and to support your work.
The feeling is mutual.
Thank you very much, Blair.
Thank you, Sarah Joy.